Hello, I'm Marshall Shore, Arizona's hip historian. Today I'm joined by the Arizona State Capitol because it was recently proclaimed online to be the ugliest state capitol in America. How did that make you feel?
It makes me feel mad and upset. I'm over 115 years old, older than the state itself, and those folks at that list took a...
Hello, I'm Marshall Shore, Arizona's hip historian. Today I'm joined by the Arizona State Capitol because it was recently proclaimed online to be the ugliest state capitol in America. How did that make you feel?
It makes me feel mad and upset. I'm over 115 years old, older than the state itself, and those folks at that list took a pic of my bum and called it ugly. Though I've had some work done, I don't feel that they were correct nor very polite.
You know, Capitol, you're looking quite dapper today.
Well, thank you, hip historian. I'm a humble capital, nothing too fancy. I'm all about local. My foundation that keeps me standing here was carved from our own nearby landmark, Camelback Mountain. My top came from Yavapai County, and the ground level is granite from South Mountain. But I have to boast about my copper top. It was old and dinged up. The wonderful youth across Arizona saved their pennies to buy me a new shiny copper dome. Thank you.
Who's with you today?
My children, the House and Senate. See, Arizona has grown a lot over the years. Instead of moving or getting rid of me and getting something new and fancy, they were added as needed. Some call them too modern, lacking class, but they are children of their era and show how we've grown since my territorial days.
Do you like it when people come to visit?
Oh, of course. I adore visitors. We're the home by and for the people. You can even get a tour of all 4 floors and hear the stories that make Arizona's history great.
All right. Well, welcome to Arizona History Happy Hour. I am so glad that you can join us this evening. I'm so excited because we have a really great show for you tonight. And so, welcome to Arizona History Happy Hour. My name is Marshall Shore, and I am so happy that you are here tonight. Now, you know, it is November 21st, and we're doing this once a month. And so, there's a lot to go through. So what we're going to kind of do is talk a little about some of the things that have happened in November in Arizona. Why, you know, today, LA is only a 6-hour drive away. But, you know, back in 1908 to 1917, they had a driving race between LA and Phoenix. Depending on the route it took different years, it was 16 to 35 hours to complete that route. That was before we had highways. Route 66 didn't go in until the National Highway and then get proclaimed Route 66 in 16. So, oh my gosh. So also, the county seat was in Tombstone until 1929 when it was moved to Bisbee. And they are in a beautiful Art Deco Cochise County building that is still standing. They still use it today, and it is indeed a beauty. Also, back in 1888, Pearl Hart, who was an amateur bandit, queen of the bandits, some may call her, her along with Joe Boot, they robbed a stagecoach between Globe and Florence. She went to trial and basically was acquitted because she kept claiming that she was she needed money to go visit her sick mother, that she had all these other circumstances, and so she was acquitted. All right, so I also have mentioned, so my name is Marshall Shore. I also go by the hip historian. And what does that mean? It means I get to play with Arizona history. And oh my gosh, you know, I recently had a chance to go up to Lowell Observatory over the weekend. They did an amazing grand opening for their Astronomy Discovery Center. And I was able to go hang out in the archives a little bit and get to see like Trip to Mars from Percival Lowell's private collection. There was a crowd of us standing out in front, watching our breath before it opened. And when it did, there was suddenly a rush of kids playing in the kids area, which was great to watch. There is an open air observatory on the very roof. And as we were sitting in the seats, it started snowing. But you know what? It was okay because those seats were heated. So my tushy was nice and comfortable as the snow fell to the ground. How decadent was that? Also, recently, in the last few weeks, did the Grand Avenue Festival. That was a blast, as well as over the weekend, did the Queer Market from the Equality Chamber of Commerce right here. Now, coming up on Saturday, we do have a haunted history and hauntings tour coming up. You can find out more about that on hiphistorian.com. I was lucky enough to Channel 5 had me in just the other day getting ready for their 75th anniversary. And I was so excited because I was able to take the map of 1947 that my neighbor, Ruta Dominguez, created several years ago. And his daughter gave me some of these maps. I gave them one, and they said that was actually the first year that they started. The TV station was 1947, before it was KPHO. And so they were so excited to have that to talk about their history as they get ready to celebrate their 75th anniversary. And then I think it recently aired on Channel 12 as we talked a little bit about kind of the story behind the amazing Mystery Castle and talked about Mary Lou and now what's going to happen to it, what's the future of it. And basically, they basically did put in to have a permit for demolition. That doesn't mean they're going to demolish it right away. Doesn't mean it's even going to be demolished, because there's a group working with several folks, other organizations, as well, as they try to save it. Now, it's not going to be saved for free. It's also going to take public support. So if you love the Mystery Castle, get ready, because there may be some call to actions. So that way you can share how much you love that quirky building all the way down on 7th Street till you hit the mountain and the road ends and you find yourself at the Mystery Castle. Also coming up, holiday season is coming up. And so middle of December, All Queer Shakespeare is launching their first production, A Christmas Carol. That's going to be a hoot and a good time. And oh my gosh, 15 years of Festivus coming up December 12th and 13th at the Downtown Public Market, back-to-back nights. It's going to be so much fun down there. I'll be down there pushing some history, selling some t-shirts, all kinds of fun stuff. And then the next day, bright and early, I'm going to be up because my friend Melissa and we are going to be televising live the Christmas parade from Glendale. And along with that, hopefully around this time, we'll be launching a virtual TV show, kind of doing some really hyper local things, talking about new entrepreneurs and what they are doing. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Oops, that helps if you hit the right button. As well as, oh my gosh, coming up, the Orpheum, they've done a major rebranding. So the Friends of the Orpheum now use that beautiful peacock on the staircase in the back. December 11th is Psycho Day. So they will indeed be showing Psycho. And if you remember that beginning of the film, at the very end of the show, we're actually going to show the opening trailer for the movie. And then also for their 96th anniversary, we are going to be doing Arizona Unzipped at the Orpheum. And you get tickets for both of those right now on the Orpheum's website. Now, I love to hear from you. So please reach out to me on Facebook, which is Marshall Shore Hip Historian. Instagram, which I just realized is wrong. It should be hip_historian. Email at hello_hiphistorian, or my website, hiphistorian.com. Now, what can you expect tonight? Oh my gosh. So we've got a little bit of trivia coming up. We have amazing Little Arizona from the vault, as well as some music history. And Kevin Schindler from Lowell Observatory is going to be our guest. We did a show with him last year, and I thought, what a perfect time to bring that back. So that's what we're going to do. And so, it would not be a happy hour without a beverage. And so here is PJ and his beverage for the month for happy hour.
Welcome to the Bates Motel. This is PJ Vader-Baron, and today we're going to be making a cocktail called Stabbing Watermelons in honor of Psycho Day. So we're going to start with an American agave spirit from Joshua Tree Distilling. We're going to do 1 full ounce. We're going to do some agave sour. I like to do 1, 2, 3 agave to lemon, or to lime to lemon on that. A little orgeat, common in tiki cocktails. Going to give it a nice salinity and a little bit of body to it. Go 1/2 ounce on that. Because we're talking Psycho Day and those shower stabbings. This is blood orange. Now in the movie, he was using Hershey syrup because it was in black and white. We're not going to put any Hershey syrup in your watermelon daiquiri here. It's going to be blood orange from Liquid Alchemist. We're actually going to do a split base with the new Empress Gin, the cucumber lemon. I like that vibe. We're going to go 3/4 of an ounce on that. Make it nice and herbaceous, botanical. And then of course the main ingredient here, we have our Real watermelon puree. Let's see if I can do this without making a mess. Of course, it'd be pretty easy to clean up if I do. 1 full ounce there. There we go. Not bad. Could have been worse. Okay, it's going to look like a murder scene in here anyway. So there we go. We are gonna. Got it. All right. Shake it up to wake it up. Here. This is the Stabbing Watermelon. Happy Psycho Day.
Well, now is Little Arizona. So, I talk a big game about being from New York, but, I really grew up in Indiana in a little tiny farm town, super tiny, about 25 people. But that gives me, I think, I enjoy a lot of big cities, small cities. So tonight we are going to talk a little bit about Bullhead City, which is in Mojave County, kind of tucked right up there in the corner. You've got Nevada, you've got California, you've got Arizona, and it's kind of right up there. Now, its population is just over 41,000 people, and it was founded back in 1942. Now, the town started because of Davis Dam. It was the headquarters, and that's where they lived and worked to build Davis Dam that stretches across Arizona and into Nevada as well. And it's got lots of water, as you can imagine. I don't know what those water levels are doing now. Hope they're doing okay. But, as its history, it originally started off called Hardyville. And it was famous for a ferry crossing, steamboat landing that were all to support those local mines that were popping up. Now, they also do have a pioneer cemetery as well, which you can go visit and learn more of the history about what Hardyville and some of its early pioneers. But, it even goes earlier than that. The early inhabitants of this area were the Mojaves. That rich soil and plentiful water provided the ground for farming to make things grow. Now, there is a legend, according to the Mojaves, that life began on Spirit Mountain, which is the highest peak visible from Bullhead City. The first account where they started making contact with non-Indigenous folks were Spaniards back in the mid-1550s. And so from there, things continue happening. You can go check out, they do have a local Colorado River Museum where you can learn about all kinds of history, all about Bullhead City and its environment. All right. And now it is time for my favorite part of the show, and possibly yours, is where the fact that you get to hear from another voice, not just mine. And so I am so excited that this evening we are able to bring a super special guest on. And, there might even be a little bit of chill in the air where he is, but we will learn all about that in just a moment. I want to bring on my friend Kevin.
Hello, great to see you.
Good to see you. So, Kevin, so folks that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Kevin Schindler. I'm the historian and public information officer at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, and I've been here 28 years. And as far as I know, it's still counting up. So I worked in our outreach program, the public program, for years, giving tours and doing telescope viewing and such. And now I do, kind of take care of our history, and that involves some exhibits and giving programs and stuff like that. So it's a really fun place to work, and Lowell is expanding with what we do for visitors, and certainly our science is real top notch. So it's a really neat piece of Arizona heritage, and it's fun to be able to be part of it.
Yeah, and I'm assuming also it's a place that probably a lot of folks, I hear a lot about it, but most people I know have not actually been there. So I'm looking forward to, I know it's always on my list. So next time I get up there, stopping by the observatory.
Oh yeah, you've got an open invitation. There's so much to see here, and it's fun because people of all ages, you don't have to have any special background to come in, and there's a lot of neat astronomy and history and stuff to learn. But at nighttime, when you can look through a telescope and gaze at Saturn or a star cluster or galaxy, and when you're looking through that eyepiece, it's just you and what you're looking at, and it's really a great connection to the universe, a real fun feeling. So it's something that everybody should do. I don't say that because I work at Lowell. I think I work at Lowell because of that, because it really is such a unique experience to be able to look through telescopes and kind of connect with the world around us, the universe around us a little bit.
Indeed. And you're going to talk about some of those super fun connections because we're getting ready to do some trivia.
Yes.
So now our trivia works a little different here than if you've done bar trivia, where it's not so important that here's the answer and we're done, but we're going to go through the questions that are all multiple choice. And then, if you don't know the answer, just guess. And then we're going to come back and actually Kevin's going to talk about some of the answers and those stories behind them, which are, oh my gosh, just wait. This is going to be so exciting. So I'm so happy to be able to do this. Now, you can keep track of, I know Anita keeps track of hers and a special notebook. It's like however you would like to do it, feel free to do it as we get ready to do some trivia. All right. What product has Lowell Observatory been compared to? Is it A, a Swiss Army knife, B, Lucid Motors, C, mesquite bean pods, or D, Bausch and Lomb? So one of those products has been compared with Lowell Observatory. Which one do you think it is? All right. Question 2. Which Arizona city had the world's first outdoor lighting ordinance? Was it A, Sedona, B, Flagstaff, C, Tucson, or D, Camp Verde? All right, so it is indeed one of those places right here in Arizona. And question 3, who discovered Pluto at Lowell Observatory? Was it A, Kit San Pedro, B, Burrell Schmidt, C, Klein Tombaugh, or D, Pierce McMath? So one of those folks at Lowell Observatory did indeed discover Pluto. All right. Question 4. The symbol for Pluto is a combination of the first 2 letters of the founder's name, but that name Pluto came from where? A, love of a certain Disney character, B, an 11-year-old British girl, C, Percival Lowell's initials, or D, the Greek god of the underworld? All right. Question 5. The first evidence of what first was discovered at Lowell? Was it A, a black hole, B, the expanding universe, C, that the Earth moves around the sun, or D, Jupiter's moons? So which of those do you think was first discovered at Lowell? Question 6. What piece of pop culture has the Clark telescope been seen on? Was it A, Carl Sagan's original Cosmos series, B, Bill Nye the Science Guy, C, The Big Bang Theory, or D, Leonard Nimoy's program? So, which part of pop culture do you think the Clark telescope has been seen on? Question 7. Founder Percival Lowell is buried where? A, the Peaceful Valley Memorial Park, B, the Lowell Observatory grounds, C, Greenwood Cemetery, or D, Better Place Forest? So Percival Lowell, the founder of the observatory, is buried where? Question 8. Percival Lowell became a great popularizer of astronomy and the idea of life in the universe, and inspired science fiction writers such as A, Edgar Rice Burroughs, B, H.G. Wells, C, Robert Goddard, or D, Carl Sagan? So which one of those authors do you think was inspired by the idea of life in the universe? Question 9. Stanley Sykes designed the dome of the Pluto Discovery Telescope and has a best-selling author connection to who? All right. Is it A, Stephen Hawking, B, Diana Gabaldon, C, Ben Bova, or D, Isaac Asimov? So which one of those has a connection to the builder of the dome? All right. Question 10. How many astronauts who walked on the moon came to the northern Arizona to train for their missions? Was it A, 0 or nada, B, 5, C, 22, or D, all? How many astronauts do you think came to northern Arizona to train for their mission to the moon? All right. Oh, and we have some bonus question. Look at that. All right. Question 11. Lowell Observatory was established in 1894, 18 years before Arizona even became a state. What site was also considered? Was it A, Tombstone, B, Tucson, C, Tempe, or D, Prescott? All right. So while you are locking in your final answers, we are going to take a quick Arizona music break and talk about the artist Hans Olsen. Now, he moved to California in the late 60s. By the early 70s, he had his first record out on a Phoenix record label. He's played with over 100 musicians and is best known as a solo act. You can see him all over town. He's still performing. You can see him at the Rhythm Room over at, I know the American Legion Post 1 has had him multiple times, but you know, he has played with so many folks, including like Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Willie Dixon, John Lee Hooker, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and the list goes on and on. He's got 10 albums that he's recorded. And so he's still touring, not just through the Valley or Arizona, but also the US and Europe. All right. So who's ready for some answers? I know I sure am, because this has gotten because like, hey, me over here, don't forget about me. All right. So what product was Lowell Observatory been compared to? A Swiss Army knife? What?
I can tell you a story about that.
Oh my gosh, fancy that.
Well, it's, when we talk about this, we're talking about we have a lot of different telescopes. That's kind of one of the main tools you have in an observatory. And our main research telescope today, the cornerstone, is called the Lowell Discovery Telescope. And it's the fifth largest telescope in the continental US. And we talk about a telescope, it's not necessarily, we're not talking about the length of it, but how wide it is. Because you have a big mirror that collects light. And so think of that mirror as like a bucket that collects light. The bigger the bucket, the more light it collects. So when we talk about telescopes, we're talking about how wide they are, how big a bucket they are. And so this is one of the biggest in the continental United States. It measures 4.3 meters across, which is about 14 feet. That's one piece of glass. But what makes the telescope even more unique is that it's got a really unique instrument, what's called an instrument cube on the end. And an instrument cube holds instruments because the telescope collects light, but then you have different instruments to break the light down and kind of analyze it. Traditionally, big research telescopes, you could have like one big instrument at a time. And then if you want to use a different instrument, like maybe you have something that takes pictures, but you want to use something like a photometer that looks at the brightness of things. It could take hours or longer to take one instrument off, put another one on. And that's a lot of lost time observing. With the instrument cube, you have 5 different instruments, and you just push a button, and within like half a second, the whole instrument cube rotates, and the light can go through a different instrument. And so you essentially can use all the instruments almost simultaneously. And so it's powerful because, like, if one of our astronomers discovers a comet, they might want to study it using different instruments, different ways of looking at it, and they can use all of them rather than, okay, well, we'll use the photometer, then we'll take that off, we'll lose a bunch of hours. You can do it almost all simultaneously. So that's why our former director, Bob Millis, said this is such a versatile telescope because you can use it with all these instruments. It's like a Swiss Army knife of telescopes.
That is so funny. Yeah, because it's like a Swiss Army knife. You have all those things, you just sit there and
Yeah.
really quickly. That's really cool that you're able to do all that.
And so that, yeah, it's a powerful thing. And the Lowell Discovery Telescope, it's located about 40 miles southeast of Flagstaff in a little community called Happy Jack. But you can also see the dome. You can see it kind of sticking up when you're driving out there, just for briefly sticking up out of some trees. But if you're on I-17 driving north, heading to the Verde Valley, there's the General Crook exit. And if right around where that exit is, if you know where to look kind of to the northeast, especially at sunset or in the afternoon when the sun angle is low, the sun will be reflecting off that dome, and you can see a little pimple of light. And so that's kind of a neat thing. I mean, you don't want to stare at that while you're focused driving, but if you know where to look, I mean, once you see it, you say that's
can do that. We'll let the passengers stare at that little endpoint of light.
Exactly.
All right. Which Arizona city had the world's first outdoor lighting ordinance? Flagstaff.
Yes, and maybe this is a partial trick question because I'm from Lowell Observatory, and that's where Lowell is. And so maybe you'd think, maybe it's where this guy's from. And it is, because, we think about Arizona, and it's a mecca for astronomy research, and has been for decades. It's one of the world's leading centers for astronomical research. And there are observatories in many parts of the state, plus the universities, University of Arizona, Arizona State University, Northern Arizona University. All 3 state universities have major astronomy and physics programs, are involved with space missions and major astronomy research. So there's this long legacy of astronomy being done here. starting with Lowell Observatory in 1894. So Lowell was established 18 years before Arizona even became a state. So it's kind of grown up with the state. And so one of the reasons our founder came here was because the skies were dark. And but by the 1950s, you had light pollution from city lights and automobiles and such that are shining the light up. And the more artificial light you shine at the sky, the less you can see of the stars and such. And in the late 1950s, Lowell was looking at acquiring a new telescope from the Perkins Observatory in Ohio. We'd set it up out here. Skies are a lot clearer than where it's cloudy a lot over in Ohio, where I grew up. And so we decided to set it up. But one of the issues was, we've got this really dark sky site outside of town, but there are some searchlights that occasionally will flash through the night. And our astronomers said, that's going to negatively impact looking at the stars. And so one of our astronomers, who at one time happened to be mayor of Flagstaff, Earl Slifer, he talked to the city council and said, "What can we do to do this? We don't want to get rid of searchlights, but just to moderate their use. Do they need to be shining all night, for instance?" And so the city created an ordinance. This was in 1958, kind of moderating the use of that light. And as it turns out, that was the world's first outdoor lighting ordinance anywhere. So that kind of set the trend. And through the years, Flagstaff and Coconino County have created other ordinances and modified them, and kind of led the way in a lot of ways in dark sky protection. And in 2001, Flagstaff, because of these efforts, was designated as the world's first international dark sky city and continues to be a leader. And today, there are a lot of dark sky communities in Arizona, Fountain Hills, Sedona, as well as parks like Grand Canyon National Park is a certified.
Oh.
And so there's not just in Arizona, around the world, but Arizona certainly plays a key in showing how it's done. And that all started here in Flagstaff.
Wow, that's real. I didn't realize that we started that whole trend. Look at us leading the blazing trails again.
Yes, blazing trails that you can't see very well, hopefully.
Indeed. All right. So who discovered Pluto at Lowell Observatory? And it was C. Clyde Tombaugh.
Yeah, Clyde Tombaugh. Sometimes, you might think maybe Percival Lowell, he's the guy that founded the observatory. And Percival Lowell, in fact, in 1905, began searching for a ninth planet he believed was out there. He called it Planet X, because in mathematics, X is the unknown. So Planet X is the unknown planet that he believed was out there. And the reason he thought it was there is because Uranus and Neptune were kind of wobbling in their orbits, and scientists couldn't account for that at the time. And so Percival Lowell and some others figured that there must be another planet out there whose gravity is tugging on them, causing them to wobble. Percival Lowell and his team searched for this from 1905 until 1916, when Lowell passed away. But a decade later, observatory leadership said, Uncle Percy was onto something. We should recommence that search. And just as they're looking at getting the search going, they talked to Lowell's brother, who's president of Harvard. He donates money for a new telescope. And the director said, okay, we've got a telescope. We need somebody to actually do the work because there's only 3 scientists. The director is busy. One of the scientists, Earl Slifer, was in the state legislature doing politics. And then there's one other astronomer that did some more galactic studies, stuff outside the solar system. And so just as our director, Vesto Slifer, is trying to figure out who's going to do this, he gets a letter from this 23-year-old farmer from Burdett, Kansas, who apparently, at nighttime, what do you do in Kansas? During the day there's farming. What do you do at night? He lives on a farm, so he built his own telescopes. And he learned the sky on his own, and he got pretty good at drawing the planets as he saw through the telescopes. So he wanted to send them to an observatory, a professional observatory, to get their take on, how good was he with his drawings. And so he sent some of these drawings to Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff because he knew about Lowell as a place that did solar system studies, studying planets and stuff in the solar system. And he got a letter back that said, "We like your drawings. What kind of physical condition are you in? Are you used to staying up late at night?" And the timing was perfect because they just happened to be looking for an assistant to help with the Pluto search. Turned out this young guy, Clyde Tombaugh, was perfect. And so they hired him just on a temporary basis, just as a trial run. And within a year, he discovered the ninth planet, Pluto. He was 24 years old when he discovered it. And, you think about this, he was a self-taught astronomer. He after discovering a planet, he got a scholarship to go to University of Kansas. And one of the great stories is he went into the, Astronomy 101 class and sat down, and the teacher saw his name, Clyde Tombaugh. He said, "Okay, you've passed the class already. If you've discovered a planet, you don't have to go through this class. You've passed." So, yeah, Clyde Tombaugh, he lived into his 90s, and he still has family living in New Mexico and elsewhere. And we're really pleased to celebrate his heritage here.
Okay, now you mentioned Pluto and planet.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's been some question. It seems to keep flip-flopping.
Well, let's see. How much time do we have? So Pluto was initially called a planet, and over time, some scientists questioned if it should be called a planet, largely because of its size. Because Percival Lowell thought there would be a really big planet, like a Jupiter-sized planet, and covered. But as time went on, scientists first realized Pluto's a lot smaller than we thought. And it got to the point where we realized this supposed planet Percival Lowell thought was out there actually doesn't exist. They just happened to find this thing we call Pluto right where he thought something was. So it was a very serendipitous discovery. If you systematically look at the sky, there's a good chance you'll discover something, at least back then, before we had so many telescopes looking at the sky. And so Pluto is called a planet. Over the years, the size, it seemed kind of small. It was kind of, its orbit, instead of being kind of in a plane, it's kind of at an angle. And so in several years back, the official body, governing body that decides on what to call things, the International Astronomical Union, they decided to reclassify Pluto as a dwarf planet. And there's a lot of debate. I think what it comes down today is, for those scientists who study planets, they call Pluto a planet in general. For those who don't study planets, who study stars and such, a lot of them say, no, it's not a planet. It's okay, call it a dwarf planet, but that's not a planet per se. So it's still confusing because like a dwarf star is a type of star, and a dwarf galaxy is a type of galaxy. But under this definition, a dwarf planet is not a type of planet. Now, for most people who study planets, I won't say all, but the majority, they say, okay, yeah, we'll call Pluto a dwarf planet because it's small, but it's a type of planet. You have the inner terrestrial planets like Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. You have the outer gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And then Pluto is this third zone of planets. And Pluto is the prototype of these icy bodies in the outer solar system. So if you're looking for consensus among scientists on what to call it, good luck. You're not going to get it. So it's, it's, to me, I think, we still call it a planet. I think, there's no official stance by Lowell Observatory. It's different astronomers feel different things. But I think in general, like I said, if you study solar system objects, you tend to call it a planet. The other thing is how it was done. The International Astronomical Union voted on whether to call it a planet or not. And that's just not done in science. You don't vote. Scientists don't get in a room and vote on things. It's more by kind of general consensus. As you do research, you write a paper, and if scientists agree, they maybe write further papers supporting it, or if they disagree, they write papers and say, no, you're not right, and this is why. And then over time, you kind of build a consensus, but they don't sit in a room and vote. Now there's one last footnote with Pluto. We didn't have this in one of the trivia questions, but I think we have to add it as an extra bonus. Clyde Tombaugh is related to a famous Major League Baseball pitcher. Who is he? He's won 2 or 3 Cy Young Awards. His Clayton Kershaw of the Dodgers.
Oh, wow.
I think it's great uncle. I think that's what it is, but they're related. Clayton Kershaw, the one side of the family are Tombaughs. So yeah, there's another good trivia question.
Indeed.
That's pretty cool. You win several Cy Youngs, and by the way, your uncle also discovered a planet.
Right, exactly. It's like, look in the sky and look.
Yeah, you had 3 Cy Youngs. Well, I found a planet.
Family reunions trying to one up each other.
Yeah, right.
All right, question 4. The symbol for Pluto is a combination of the first 2 letters, but the name came from an 11-year-old British girl
named Venetia Burney. And after Pluto was discovered, and this is kind of a combination answer because the name Pluto is a mythological character, the god of the underworld. So after Pluto was discovered, it was discovered on February 18th, 1930, but the observatory didn't announce it until several weeks later because they wanted to study it more and make sure what they saw was real and not a speck on one of their photographs and it actually wasn't there. So they studied it for several weeks. Again, Percival Lowell had passed away by this point, but he's the one that had started the search. And so they study it from February 18th for a few weeks. So we get to starting to get to mid-March, and the observatory decided, okay, this is a planet, we're going to announce it to the world. So they decided to announce it on March 13th, 1930. March 13th is the date that William Herschel discovered Uranus in 1781. But March 13th, 1930 would have been Percival Lowell's 75th birthday also. So what a great way of celebrating Percival Lowell. And so after it was discovered and announced, it made news headlines around the world. And as the story goes, in England, there was 11-year-old Venetia sitting around the breakfast table with her grandparents. And she said, I've been studying mythology in school. They should call that planet Pluto because Pluto is the god of the underworld, the most cold, distant region. And that's where Pluto, this thing is. It's really in a cold area. It's way out there. And so her grandpa knew an astronomer. So grandpa contacted the astronomer and he sent a telegram to Lowell Observatory suggesting the name Pluto as suggested by Venetia. Now, the observatory received several hundred suggestions from around the world. We still have a lot of those telegrams and letters suggesting all sorts of names. But Venetia's suggestion of Pluto was the first suggestion of Pluto. We got, I think, more than a dozen people suggested Pluto, but hers was the first one that came in. And
wow.
So, well, she didn't technically name it. The observatory did, but she suggested the name and they followed her lead. And in the announcement about the name, it said, we've decided to call it Pluto as first suggested by Venetia Burney. And she went on to become a school teacher. And so that was kind of her, what a neat little thing to put on your resume.
Right, exactly, that you named a planet. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But that's great that they took kind of that public influence.
Right. And, there's another thing with it that goes with the name also. And that's that the planets all have symbols. They're not necessarily scientific, used in science circles, but in kind of everyday life, astrology, sometimes you see them. And so Mars is a circle with the arrow pointing up, like the symbol for males. Mm-hmm. Venus is a circle with the cross pointing down like females. Well, for Pluto, the scientists here at Lowell said, well, we like the name Pluto for a symbol let's use a combination of its first two letters, a P and L.
Oh,
Which,
so that's
by
where
the
that
way,
comes from.
those
Oh.
are the initials of Percival Lowell. And so, what a great tribute. They announced the discovery on what would have been his 75th birthday, and they give it a name whose symbol, cements his heritage forever with his initials.
How cool is that?
Yeah, scientists are people too, for the most part. And so,
It can be said about any population for the most
yes,
part.
right. Yeah, for the most part.
So, all right. So the first evidence of what was discovered at Lowell, the expanding universe.
Right. If we go back more than 100 years, and Percival Lowell was running his observatory, and he had some assistant astronomers who worked with him, and he had his great 24-inch refracting telescope, so 24 inches in the diameter. It's actually 32 feet long. And if you come up to Flagstaff and you see what looks like a huge birthday cake on the side of the hill, that's the telescope that houses this old telescope. And it's been there, it's the dome that houses the telescope. It's been there since 1896, this building. And so Percival Lowell had that telescope, and he got an instrument called a spectrograph that when attached to the telescope, you can point it at things in space. And when the light comes through the telescope, the spectrograph, it breaks light down into its individual components. So we can't travel to the sun, but by pointing, or stars, but by pointing a telescope, a spectrograph their way, we can look at the light, and every element has like its own specific fingerprint of light, as it were. So you look at this pattern of light and know, oh, that's hydrogen, oh, that's helium. So that's how we tell what things are made of, even though we can't get there, we can look at their light. Well, Lowell had this instrument, and he wanted VM Slifer to look at these fuzzy blobs that were out in space. And they were then called spiral nebulae, which many astronomers thought that they were young planets being formed, protoplanetary systems, you could call them. And so Percival Lowell wanted his assistant, Vesto Slifer, to study these, and he wanted to see if they were made of the same elements that you would find in planets in the solar system, like Jupiter and Saturn. If the chemical signatures were the same, then maybe that would prove that these things are actually young solar systems. Well, turns out they didn't match. They had a different chemical signature. But what Vesto Slifer found, incredibly, by studying these things over taking pictures with exposures of dozens of hours, was that these blobs in general were moving away from us at incredible speed, some in excess of 900 times the speed of sound. And this was completely unheard of in scientific circles. When he announced the discovery of several of these blobs moving away so fast, he announced them in a science meeting in 1914, and he got a standing ovation because scientists realized we don't know what to make of this, but it tells us what we do know is that the universe must be much older and larger. If these things are moving this fast, and even if you multiply by since 1776, when the United States, the Declaration of Independence was signed, multiply 150 years times how fast these are moving, the universe has to be huge. And so that was the first evidence that the universe was expanding. Astronomers didn't really look at it that way yet. It wasn't until the 1920s that another name that most of us know, Edwin Hubble, he used Slifer's information as well as other astronomers' observations, ability to measure distances and such, to actually come up with an explanation for what this was, which he called the expanding universe. So the first observational evidence was done right here at the observatory, right here in Flagstaff, with a telescope that visitors can still look through today. So it's kind of that connection with the past.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right, question 6. What piece of pop culture has had the Clark telescope seen on it? And it's all of those?
Trick question.
No, we're never known for our trick questions.
That's
But
quite
oh my gosh, that's so cool. I mean, everything from Carl Sagan to the Big Bang Theory.
right. And most of those, the original Cosmos theory that Carl Sagan did in early 1980s, one of the episodes was about Mars. It was called Blues for Mars Planet. And he did part of the episode from the telescope dome. And for those familiar with Carl Sagan, it's just, you can look it up on YouTube and see that segment, and it's listening to his voice and, the billions and billions, just his awe and wonder about the universe. It still gives me goose pimples to listen to him speak. Even though he passed away in the 1990s, he still kind of is with us in a lot of ways. Those other shows, Leonard Nimoy interviewed Carolyn Shoemaker here back in the 90s, and Carolyn at one time discovered more comets than anybody else in the world. And by the way, her husband was Gene Shoemaker, the father of astrogeology, who headed up training astronauts here in Flagstaff. And Carolyn had raised the kids. Her husband's like this world-leading geologist. After Carolyn, she's 50 years old or so, she's done raising the kids. And she said, Gene, what am I going to do now? And he said, well, I've got all the science going on. Why don't you give me a hand? And he was studying impacts, like on Earth, like meteor crater, where space rock is impacted. So he's studying these things, but also want to study the origin of these impacts, which are comets and asteroids. So he wanted to study the skies and look for comets and asteroids and maybe find some that could impact us. And so he said, well, why don't you help out with this? And she did. And she became so proficient, again, starting when she was 50, that she discovered something like, I think it was 23 comets. There's automated programs that do it now, but she held the record for years of the most comets discovered. And I think as a final poetic thing, Gene and then Carolyn, he had spent his entire career looking at bodies from space and how they impact impactors. In 1993, one of the comets they discovered, along with another astronomer, David Levy, called Shoemaker-Levy 9, they discovered that it was going to bash into Jupiter the following year. And it did. And astronomers around the world could view this and see these scarred patches when it impacted Jupiter. And how beautiful is that they've studied their whole life, or Gene Shoemaker, his whole life studying impactors, and he discovers a comet that for the first time in human history, we're able to watch a solar system body impact another one. And they're the ones that discovered it.
Wow.
You can't make this stuff up. It's really
neat. That's so cool. And what I also like is that so many, that it's gender neutral. I mean, the fact that it's like men and women have been have had effects.
And astronomy certainly through history is a male-dominated field, and it still is, but there's certainly a place for everybody, and there's certainly a lot more women and people of color and others in the field. And it's that, at some point you're 7 years old, you look up the sky, you fall in love, that's what you want to do. I just realized also we didn't actually another one of those answers that's kind of fun of that question of what the pop culture. One of the other answers, Bill Nye the Science Guy. I have a picture of me standing with him at the old telescope. That was back in the 1990s. But the Big Bang Theory, the TV show, this is kind of cool because I always liked the Big Bang Theory, and several years ago, my family watched it. We'd watch it sometimes. So I was waiting for them to come home from dinner. And I always remember watching the show, and every once in a while I see a scene that looked like there's a telescope in the background, like a picture of a telescope. And so I'm watching the show, waiting for them, and there was a scene with this poster. So I decided, I got my remote quick, and I TiVoed it. So I waited to came up again. I paused it. And when I paused it, I thought, that's not just a telescope. This is the Clark telescope here at Lowell Observatory. And I recognized that picture was taken in the 1990s with one of our astronomers here. And that's our telescope in the show. And so that was great because it inspired me to watch a bunch more Big Bang Theory. And I found that that poster is on the wall in season 1, except for the first episode, but it's on the wall for the entire first season. And then the next season they changed the decoration some, and it's not there. But okay. It makes a cameo appearance on the poster there.
Wow. Again, you said you can't make that stuff up. That's pretty crazy. Yeah. And speaking of crazy, so question 7. Founder Percival Lowell is buried where? On the grounds of the Lowell Observatory?
Yes. Within, 100 feet of that classic Clark telescope built in the 1890s that's inside the big birthday cake looking building. Within 100 feet is this smaller building with a dome on it. And that's where Percival Lowell's entombed. His widow thought when he died unexpectedly in 1916, she thought he would appreciate being near his beloved telescope. And what better building than a mausoleum that kind of looks like a little telescope dome. And so as the story goes, he's in a box inside a coffin that's facing so that when Mars rises in the sky, he can, see Mars, his beloved planet. So it's bizarre. He's right on site. And so many people walk through that little building. I mean, there's a sign that says what it is and everything, but it's unexpected.
Indeed. No, that just shows, how passionate he was.
Yes. And I should say that there's another great observatory, Lick Observatory near San Jose. And the namesake, James Lick, is actually entombed underneath the telescope, like in the pier of the telescope. So Percival Lowell got his own building here. So I don't know what it is about, but it's interesting to think that, we're not a cemetery here, but in some way, we have our exalted founder is on site here. So be careful what you say when you're walking around the observatory.
Indeed, because you could still be listening.
I've got to tell you one thing. There's some great stories about the mausoleum. One is back in the 1970s, we had some visitors here, and they walked up to the mausoleum, and it was during our rainy season, and they decided to go down in the front of the mausoleum and look at it, and they saw what looked like blood coming out the door, and they went running back to the visitor center. There's blood coming out the door, like Amityville Horror type stuff. And our staff was a little skeptical because Lowell had been dead for 50 or 60 years. They went up, and it was during the rainy season, and there was a pool of rust that was coming out the door, and that was the blood that they saw. Soon after that, the casket that he was buried in was entombed in a stone box, so you don't see any pool of blood or anything like that,
or rust or anything else.
No. There was back in 2001, I think it was, we used to have a living history program at Lowell Observatory where we would dress up as astronomers from the past and tell their story by what we euphemistically called acting here, because it was just us educators. So I was Percival Lowell. The resemblance that's uncanny. We're male.
I was going to say, I think that's about it.
We both had glasses at one point. And so anyways, I played him. So the last night we were done with Voices from the Past. We went up to the mausoleum to pay tribute to Percival Lowell, to lift a glass of wine and toast him. And we went inside to toast, and we walked outside, and Jupiter was up. Mars was up, the red planet. So we're toasting Percival, and the red planet's up the sky. We walked outside, and the whole sky was red. It was the glow. it was the Northern Lights. When the sun was particularly active that year, and the sun sends, the more active it is, you hear about like radio interference. Well, that's when we get more Northern Lights. Aurora Borealis in the north, Aurora Australis in the south. Generally, we don't get them this far south. It's the only time in my life I've seen the Northern Lights. It was on the night that we were in Percival Lowell's mausoleum toasting him, and we came out and the sky was red. It was eerie. And in fact, there was a TV station in Phoenix. That night, they reported a big fire north of town because the sky looked like it was on fire. And then later found out it was actually the Northern Lights. And you see a lot of pictures of Northern Lights that are kind of green streamers and bluish, but it depends on what element is interacting. And so down here it was I can't remember if it was oxygen that's red, but anyways, that's why they were red. But again, the only time I've ever seen them, and they don't get this far south that often. So it was kind of a cool thing being in the mausoleum that night.
Yeah, no, that would have been really cool walking out and seeing that. All right, question 8. Percival Lowell became a great popularizer of astronomy, and the idea of life in the universe has inspired science fiction writers, such as, and again, it's an all of the above.
And I guess I'm not sure if Robert Goddard actually wrote science fiction at all, but Carl Sagan, who was a great scientist, also he wrote Contact, for instance,
Which became a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you think about Percival Lowell. Well, think about today. We've been going through COVID the last couple of years, so books that are coming out, a lot of books might have a theme about COVID because that's been in everybody's life right now. There's such an awareness about it. When we go back to the 1890s, and Percival Lowell was such a popularizer of science, even though his ideas about there being intelligent life on Mars proved to be wrong, and in fact, the supposed canals that were evidence of this life don't exist, but he was such an eloquent speaker and gifted writer that he built this consciousness that, okay, maybe this isn't proof, but could there be life on Mars? This consciousness that there is life there. And so what do the writers of the time write about? They incorporate this Martian life into the writings, like Edgar Rice Burroughs and H.G. Wells. And then it's interesting, you have a scientist inspiring writers who then inspire future scientists. And so, Carl Sagan knew about Percival Lowell's research, but he also read Edgar Rice Burroughs and H.G. Wells. That inspired him to go into science. And then you have, some who were inspired to go into science became astronauts. And they went to the moon and they inspired some of our astronomers today, who then inspired future science fiction writers. It kind of is a continuation. It's pretty neat. So Percival Lowell didn't intend to inspire writers to come up with science fiction, but he did, and it really, it's had a really interesting impact.
Right. I mean, I would say like today, the guy out of New York. I think
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, again, I can only imagine it's kind of like you're talking about hearing these people talk. It's like having him like there and seeing such animation and sharing so much passion.
Right. They started out, I think, so many people, it's not just science, it's so many walks of life where, for so many of us, at some golden age, it seems like 7 or 8 years old, that you're just so aware about the world around you, and you just fall in love with something. You fall in love with animals and you want to be a vet. Or for me, I was picking blackberries one day. I was 7 years old in Ohio. I was picking blackberries and found this rock with all these really cool looking like shells inside. And then I looked down, there's another rock, and it had shells too. And I put them together and they fit together. It was a rock that had broken apart. And I instantly fell in love with fossils. And I went to school for that. And, one of our more of our scientists who grew up going to launches of Apollo missions to the moon and that inspired them to want to go into space sciences, study space. And so it's something that happens around us all the time. And that's something that we certainly want to do here at Lowell Observatory. We carry out leading research and also share the results of that research. We communicate science. And ultimately, we want to inspire people around the universe, especially kids, to look around, and maybe if you like it enough, maybe you want to do this as your career. But if nothing else, be aware of your surroundings. And that's the Big Dipper. I can point out the Big Dipper. I know that's Mars. Just being able to look up and feel that connection to the universe. And that's something we want to inspire people to do.
Indeed. I mean, and to be curious.
Right. And it started with Percival Lowell, who said, what's the point of doing science unless you share it with people and make them co-discoverers? One person, Clyde Tombaugh, discovered Pluto, but so many other people kind of co-discovered it. Like they feel like it's their planet today. And so it's an exciting thing.
Indeed. All right. So question 9, Stanley Sykes designed the dome of the Pluto Discovery Telescope and has a best-selling author connection to whom? Diana Gabaldon.
Yeah, Diana Gabaldon is the author of the Outlander series, which has also been made into a TV show. And her parents, her dad was a state senator, but on the mom's side, it's the Sykes family. And so her great grandfather was mayor of Flagstaff at one time, and his father was Stanley Sykes. And Stanley and his brother Godfrey came over from England in the 1880s. They settled in Flagstaff. They had a bicycle repair shop in downtown Flagstaff. I say downtown, it was, a few buildings. But in 1896, when Percival Lowell was got his new telescope, this Clark telescope, the 32-foot long tube, but he needed a building to put it in. And so he went downtown, and there was a shop, makers and menders of anything. And there was the Sykes brothers. And he went in and said, you make or mend anything, make me a telescope dome. Telescope's 40 feet long, figure out what to do. And they did. The brothers designed it, and that's the dome that still sits here today. Well, Godfrey left, but Stanley spent the rest of his career here. And so in the late 1920s, when we decided to recommence the search for a ninth planet, he designed a telescope dome based on that design they used for the old one. And that's the design they used for the Pluto Discovery Telescope. And that was Diana Gabaldon's great-grandfather.
Wow.
And in fact, one of the fun things we're looking forward to this year is in June, we're opening a new exhibit, historic exhibit about the Sykes brothers. And Diana Gabaldon has loaned us several articles, artifacts from the family that we can use in the exhibit. So it's just a really neat connection.
Oh, wow. Yeah, let me know when that's going on. I mean, that would be fun to come up and see.
Sure. I know we're looking at June, probably. We don't have everything set, but yeah.
Very cool. All right. So question 10, how many astronauts who walked on the moon have come to North Arizona to train for that mission? All.
Right. We think about the Apollo astronauts. Those were the astronauts in the 1960s and early 70s, and 12 different people walked on the moon, and another 12 in addition to that orbited the moon, and all of them did some training in northern Arizona. Several up here at Lowell, but all of them around northern Arizona because Gene Shoemaker, who kind of headed up a lot of the training of astronauts, he was like other scientists who said, if all we do is send test pilots that are operating the spacecraft to the moon to plant a flag, thumb our noses at the Russians and say we beat you, because that was the goal for going, was to beat the Russians, and to come back, then what a wasted opportunity. We should do science when we're there. And if we're going to do science, And we've got to train these guys. They're test pilots. They're not scientists. They're very smart, but they're test pilots. And northern Arizona has the best preserved impact crater on Earth, meteor crater, and that's like what they're going to see on the moon. And we want to inspire them to learn geology. What more inspirational geologic place than the Grand Canyon? The geology may not be exactly the same as the moon or even close in some cases, but they all went there to get inspired about learning geology and how to read the rocks. Because looking at rocks is like looking at a book. It tells a story. And so all the astronauts came here. Neil Armstrong, the first to walk on the moon, he was here first in 1963 and came for several later training missions. And I think to me is so neat about this is we're now looking at going back to the moon. Right now, the plan is to send orbiters in 2020, I think 2024, is that right? And then next year would be a lander. Those astronauts are current day astronauts still come to northern Arizona for training to hone their geology skills. Because when you go there, you're going to explore. And they're doing going to some of the same training places as the original Apollo astronauts went to. So it's not just a footnote in history, but when we are back on the moon, I'm hoping that we can say every astronaut, past and present, who's walked on the moon, trained here in Arizona.
Wow.
And they trained elsewhere also, but this was one of the key places.
Right. That's just amazing. And then we have our bonus question. Lowell Observatory was established in 1894. Before Arizona was a state, what other sites were considered? Oh, so it was all of those. It was Tucson, Tombstone, Tempe, and Prescott.
Right. Percival Lowell had hired an assistant named Andrew Douglas to travel around the territory. Again, this is Arizona territory. It wasn't a state yet. Take a telescope with them and some instruments to take atmospheric as well as astronomical measurements. Look at the barometers and temperatures, as well as looking through telescopes at distant objects to see how clear the sky is. And he went all across the territory. He started in Tombstone, went to Tucson. In Tempe, he set up on the side of a mountain where ASU football stadium is today. Luckily, they didn't choose that site. That would have been very good because it's in the middle of a lot of lights today.
Right.
Went to Prescott and then finally ended up in Flagstaff and said, Flagstaff's a great location, high elevation, the higher the elevation, the less air you have to look through.
Oh.
And think about if you're in a swimming pool and you open your eyes and everything's fuzzy because the light is passing through water and water is bending the light, making it blurry. Air does the same thing. If we had no air, you wouldn't have twinkling stars. But we have air. The light is passing through, and the air causes the light to blur, to twinkle. That's why we have twinkling stars.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah. So the higher the elevation, the less air you're looking through and the less twinkling. Twinkling is great if you're on a date and you want romance, but for astronomers, twinkling's not so good because
Right.
if it's like that, what's it going to be like when you're magnifying through the telescope? It's just going to be, you're not going to be able to see any detail.
Wow.
Flagstaff was a good site, but as it turns out, we know that Arizona is a mecca for astronomy. Tucson is certainly an outstanding site, and there are so many major observatories there today. So the entire state is really a leader in astronomy, both research and education. And it's fun to be able to talk about stuff like this because it's the science that's being done, but it's being done by people. And there's a lot of personality that you talk about, and there's a lot of quirky coincidences, or things like connections, Diana Gabaldon and Stanley Sykes. It's just fun to be able to talk about this.
Wow. I want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing what obviously is a passion of yours. But I mean, this really incredible history of Arizona that I mean, I've known a little bit of, but this was so fascinating, finding all these other little tendrils and threads.
Well, it's great to share it, and that's what we do here is we want to make it fun for everybody. We live in a stressful times in a lot of ways, and to be able to take a moment and do something that's enjoyable, and heck, maybe we'll learn something along the way too. But it's really an honor for us to be able to share this heritage with people, and that's why we try to make it as accessible as possible.
So how can people find out about programs going on at Lowell?
Well, you could go to our website, lowell.edu, has everything that's happening. We've got social media pages, Facebook, Twitter. I drew a blank, but there's some of the other common social media. We have a blog or well, we do have blogs being written, but we also have a podcast still called Starry Skies. And so we've got all sorts of different programs, or just come up and visit. We're open pretty much every day except for major holidays, and right now every night except for Tuesday. And so and the admission is great because if you come during the daytime, that's still good for that night. So you can
nice.
Check out some of the cool historic stuff, or look at the sun safely during the day, and then at night come back and look through the telescopes, or hear one of our astronomers talk about the research, or educators talking about mythology of the sky. There's a lot of different programs going on, and so the website really kind of explores a lot of that stuff.
Okay, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on. Have a great rest of your night, and I definitely will see you soon in Flagstaff.
Sounds great. Great talking with you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, that was amazing. I love Kevin so much and what he's been doing up there. What a fun time. It really is. If you haven't been there recently, this new astronomy center they just opened up is so much, oh my gosh, so much fun to play and enjoy. So Kevin, thank you so much for being on with us last year and doing that. And I love all his stories. Now you'll see why when I say, you might want to share, because there's some really cool history that we just keep having more and more fun with. I want to give a shout out to, we talked about how at the end of the episode, we would show the Psycho opening scene. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, we will be here in December as well. So look forward to seeing you on the third Thursday, which I think is the 19th. So looking forward to that. And thank you all so much. And have a happy Thanksgiving if I don't see any of you before then. And hopefully I'll see you at things like Festivus or so many of the other festivals coming up. All right, get ready for some Psycho.
did eat your lunch, did you?
I better get back to the office. These extended lunch hours give my boss excess acid.
Why don't you call your boss and tell him you're taking the rest of the afternoon off? Friday anyway, and hot.